Welcome in. We are on to week 10. There are, again, some surprising injuries and more buys. We're back to having buys 2 weeks in a row, I guess. Chiefs, Rams, Dolphins, and Eagles. A lot more fantasy relevant players this week, Mike. Anybody you're missing on your team? I missed half my team this week. So
this week was actually tough for me, tougher than that 16 by a couple weeks ago. For whatever reason, I had a lot of 49ers, Lions guys. So this coming week, not so bad for me personally, but there's some Chiefs, Dolphins, Eagles, and Rams. Those are some pretty, a lot of fantasy relevant guys on those teams. So it's tough for people. The waiver wire isn't great this week, but we gotta make with what we have, right?
I mean, it's not horrible, but it is a lot tougher. That's part of the reason we've been kind of pushing people so hard to pick up players earlier. I mean, a big one tonight, for example, can probably pick up Quentin Johnston ahead of the kickoff, but
I mean, it's especially difficult too with Travis Kelce taking back-to-back bye weeks here. That was rough.
Yeah,
he was already enjoying his London or Germany weekend, right?
So weird, like
too many pretzels or something. I don't know what's going on over there.
Yeah, it's so strange how he can just be like it's one thing if you have like a bunch of other studs on the team and pass catchers. They literally have like Kelce and no one else consistent, and it's just like, what is going on? I don't know.
Rice scored. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and then he just disappeared he played the first drive and took the rest of the game off. Apparently, I don't know.
Well, they're sleepy. What do you expect them? They're flying for what? You have an 8-hour time difference that suddenly shows up. You're only there for 3 days. That's horrible planning on their part. I mean, they should have gone immediately after their went over there and started hanging out in Germany for the week, get acclimated, and then just wipe the floor with them. But they still pulled off the win, so that's a plus at least.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's. I think it's particularly good with the quarterbacks and tight ends. Running backs and wide receivers are a little more difficult, especially the running backs.
Yeah, running backs are real tough. I mean, I feel like we'll move into it. Quarterbacks. The one I like is Bryce Young, 16% rostered currently, mostly because he gets the Bears, who just like to give it up to quarterback. And he hasn't been great, but he has shown a lot of poise. This week I felt like he has been hit too much until he was a lot more gun shy, and I don't think that's going to happen during the versus the Bears. The Colts were definitely ready for him. Texans have been a good defense. So have Miami after really getting after the quarterback. And I think the Bears aren't going to be able to do that. So, but his past 3 games, 12.68 fantasy points, 14.5 fantasy points, and 9 fantasy points. What's really hurting him, I mean, this past game was the 3 interceptions, and he's only been throwing for a touchdown a game. I think that can easily change this week, especially since the weakness of the Bears is really the secondary. And if he can get it to Thielen and Hurst, he's going to be set and ready to go.
Yeah.
Well, the weakness of the Bears is the front office, but that's a whole different issue.
Yeah.
That's the same issue with the Chargers. Yeah. We can do this all day.
Yeah. Yeah. You would hope Justin Fields is going to be back too. And, maybe it could be a shootout, a high scoring game. And that's good obviously for fantasy. So, it's not a bad one. Again, it's, hopefully I'm just looking at, just double checking. So we got Mahomes, Tua, and Hurts out. I put a few guys on here. Kyler Murray is coming back this week. He has to come back this week.
They are starting. He has been named the starter officially. So
this is more. I don't know if I want to start him his first week back. It's a risk for sure. But if you don't need a start this week and you want to, he definitely has the most upside out of any guy that we're gonna mention on this list. Plays the Falcons, so it's not a terrible matchup. But this is more for maybe your bye weeks in week 11 or 12, or you just need an upside quarterback. So there's one, Josh Dobbs. What an awesome game story. Everything about that was awesome.
The fact that he did absolutely no prep with any of the team and came out and was able to beat the Falcons. Not that that's a big accomplishment, but it's something.
Yeah. And he, I guess like O'Connell was describing the plays, like, okay, each time, like, this guy's going to do this and this guy's going to do that. And But yeah, he's been a top 10 quarterback this year. He's actually been quarterback 5 since week 2. Week 1, he put up 1 point, and it's understandable. He came into the team for the Cardinals 2 weeks of prep, which is more than what he had this week, but 2 weeks of prep and took over the team, and they looked bad. But since week 2, he's been QB5, 40 plus rushing yards in 6 games this year. He has 4 rushing touchdowns. He does play the Saints, so it's a tough matchup, but we've seen him.
He changed teams and is quite the upgrade compared to the Cardinals as well. So he's going to have a little more time. He's still going to be really able to open up the game with his ability to, like you said, run. And so it's going to be interesting. He did lose Osborne, so I think there's also a boost for Powell this week as well. But I really like that pick. That's somebody I'm looking at potentially picking up. So
yeah, and he had 2 of his better games were against the Cowboys and 49ers. So I'm not saying he's matchup proof necessarily, but if he's going to run, he's going to put up good points. So and then he gets the Broncos and Bears the 2 following weeks after week 10. So he has just as many 20-point games and 4-point per passing touchdown as Mahomes and Lamar. So it's kind of crazy, like what Josh Dobbs is doing this year. So I like that one.
On that same point, you're talking about long term. Will Levis. I mean, talk about somebody who has, when it gets to the upcoming weeks, he really doesn't have a difficult schedule moving forward. Him and Henry are about to just eat people alive. So if he continues to do those dump offs, it's going to be a big potential for you too, if he's available.
Okay, don't they get the Texans twice in the fantasy playoffs?
They do.
Yeah. So, and Henry destroys, I mean, I know we're getting off topic. Henry destroys the Texans, and we just saw what Baker was able to do. Who, Derek Carr is another one on my list. He should be able to get you 15 to 18 points. Taysom Hill, who we're going to talk about later, does limit his upside, but and the Saints have the third easiest quarterback schedule the rest of the way. So if you just need a safe 15 points, maybe 18, you can throw Carr in there, and you should be able to get it. It's what he's had like 5 weeks in a row, and then this is kind of Steve's guy. He's been talking about him every week. Is Baker. I started him this week over Geno, and I won my matchup because of it. And yeah, he's been really good too. The perfect streamer, I think.
For sure. I was telling people all week, I'm terrified of playing Geno. Like, that's not somebody I was even kind of thinking about, because that Ravens D has become something that's terrifying to play against.
Yeah. I wasn't 100% sure, because like if you looked at who they played in terms of quarterbacks, it was not good at all. Like, they got Burrow when he couldn't, didn't have a calf, and there was a couple other. I was like, is it the Ravens just getting lucky with quarterbacks against quarterbacks? But then I decided to make the change, and so Baker was nice, and he gets the Titans in week 10, and he just seems to be again a safe floor, and he has a potential to get 20 plus points. And he almost had a 54-yard touchdown. It was tackled at the 1. Evans was. So he would have had like a massive game. I think like 25 plus points. There's some good options out there for sure.
Yeah, and it's it's definitely again an easier position to stream. It seems like this week, and a lot of people are going to have to. I mean, if you were doing any kind of planning, hopefully you were already ready for this. But losing Mahomes, who really hasn't been super impressive. Stafford's out, so you weren't playing that, but losing Tua and Hurts are definitely going to hurt you. So now we'll move into the position that is a lot more difficult to find anybody to pick up in running back. So with the fact that it's somebody I have been quietly watching, it's Antonio Gibson, 40.3% rostered. With Samuel out, he's been really that kind of position player for them. I know that at the same point, Dotson has clearly got a push up as well. Thomas, not so much, but it's just been a quiet transition for him the past 2 games. He's seen 5 targets and caught all 5 of them in both the games. He's put up 9.2 fantasy points and 12.6 fantasy points, and he's been very serviceable. I mean, if you're looking for a running back to get you around that 10-point mark, he's been hitting it pretty consistently. And I mean, this week you hit 10 points, you're pretty much a top 24 running back. So, and that's saying, I mean, on people who have, for example, James Cook, that hurts you. Or if you were playing Henderson or Freeman, like those were a lot more difficult this week. It's harder to play them. So That's the person I'm most likely to lean into for if you're needing a running back streamer. So I'm actually trying to trade. If you can, I'm trying to trade for Madison. I think it's a cheap buy. And the fact, like we've talked about, Dobbs really opens up that game, and that dump off. You saw how he completely boosted Amari DeMarcado, and so having Madison with Akers now out seems like a must buy at this point.
Yeah. And, going back to Gibson, I think in games that they're generally more of a shootout or trailing, he's probably going to get a little more run. And they play the Seahawks, so it could happen. It's not like the Seahawks have been amazing, but they could put up points. So I like that one as like a spot starter because there's not many spot starters. A couple guys that maybe you could throw in there. Deontay Foreman, I was a little surprised, is under the 50% threshold. I know he wasn't great the last 2 weeks. That's just kind of who he is. That big week was he's a touchdown or bust running back, but they play Thursday night, so I know Khalil Herbert can come back. I just don't know, is he really going to come back and play much Thursday night?
Yeah,
I don't think so. And we've seen what they're going to do. They're going to they gave him 20 touches last week with Roschon there, with Darren and Evans. So I think you can get one more week out of Foreman. They play the Panthers, who are the second worst team against running backs. So if he's out there, I'm totally fine with starting him. And, you hope he falls into the end zone and you get 12, 14 points, but it definitely could happen against the Panthers. So, and then Devin Singletary is another one that maybe you can start this week if Pierce is out. It's not great. It's not wonderful. He didn't do much.
I really thought for sure they'd use it more in the passing game, and that just completely went away.
Yeah. Yeah. And
everybody else scored. Literally everybody else on the team scored. And he's just it's fine, guys. Just leave me here. Yeah. I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah. It's man, their run game is, it's absolutely terrible. But if he can get 15 touches, maybe they want to get the run game going. And that's only if Dameon Pierce is out. I'll start him if he's out, just because I think I can get, 12 plus touches from him. And that's going to be maybe hard to find. But if Pierce is back, then I don't want to start either one, to be honest. So those two guys, you can maybe spot start. Keaton Mitchell, this one's tough. Like he's available in every league. Rookie, super fast, lightweight guy, but he had a huge game. Again, they were blowing him out. Hard to know what the usage is going to be, but it's also hard to see 140 yards and not at least try and pick him up and see. I wouldn't start him this week, but maybe just see what happens. And could he be that HN for this team that just can super explosive? Add something that Justice Hill and Gus Edwards don't have, like a guy that can take it to the house, 60-yard run.
I believe Edwards had a pass for 80 yards last week. So
don't hate on
They're very different. You're correct, though. That is definitely his upside is there. He's very much an A-Chan light. If he can move up, that's for sure. And he should be able to beat out Hill, who's been really nothing. It's just, again, that coaching staff really wants to be all in on their running back. It needs to be a guy that has been tenured, knows the playbook backward and forward, can protect Lamar, and we'll see. I'm hopeful for him, but it's definitely more of a long-term or upside play.
For sure. And I like to think like NFL coaches are kind of like us in fantasy, where it's like, oh, I just saw 150 yards. Like, I can't get away from that. I thought about that when DeAndre Swift in week 2 went off, and people were talking about like, but Kenneth Gainwell was out. He's going to come back. And I was like, how do you go away from what you just saw? How do you get away from that? Or Jaylen Warren for the Steelers in preseason, how do you get away from a guy that can take it to the house 60 yards? So I kind of think that with Mitchell. So there's some upside there. Charbonnet and Tyjae Spears are just consistently on this list as handcuffs. And even in deeper leagues, they might be flex where they might get 8-10 touches, depending on the game. And then it's kind of getting to that season of if you're going to make the playoffs, you maybe want to consolidate your roster. Yeah, grab your handcuffs. So like Travion Williams for the Bengals, Tank Bigsby for the Jags, Amir White for the Raiders, Josh Kelly for the Chargers, Rico Dowdle, the Cowboys, Matt Breida for the Giants, Kenneth Gainwell for the Eagles. All these guys, like maybe if you have that player, you want to protect your assets kind of, because there's not going to be much there if you lose a guy in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, we are for sure in cuffing season, folks. So hope you're ready to do that because you might need to. And even this week, both Swift and Gainwell scored. So they both had fantasy values and are both top 24 running backs at this point. So
yeah, and you know, if you're asking me, I don't need a starter this week, and you're like, do I pick up Tajay Spears and I have Henry or Devin Singletary? It's Spears like 1,000%. You know, unless I really desperately need that start. Even Deontay Foreman, like, who could be nothing when Khalil Herbert comes back. It could just be, I know I'm going to take the protection of the handcuff there. Even if I don't have Henry or Kenneth Walker, I'm still rostering Charbonnet and Tajay Spears.
Yeah, I mean, good options to have for sure, just because you don't know. And I mean, one of the things that I like to do if I have a player I can burn, I like to pick up a handcuff usually before kickoff. It's a strategy that occasionally works. I mean, can easily end up with a league winner that way if it's your player goes down or somebody else's player goes down and you just have been watching and waiting for that person. Like clearly, if either Edwards or Hill go down and having Keaton Mitchell, like that would be a massive boost. But
yeah,
we'll get away from running back. We'll move into wide receiver. No shock. Still going Demario Douglas here, 21.9% rostered this week. I was expecting more out of him. Still seeing carries, which is interesting, or at least a carry a game for the past 3 weeks has been crazy. 11.4 fantasy points, 7.9 fantasy points, and this past week, 10.5 fantasy points. He is really just the one there. Him and Henry and Juju actually got some usage this week. He's back and at least playing, so I'm curious to see how this continues to separate, and if Parker comes back healthy, it'll be interesting to see. But the other name, with the change of quarterback from Ritter to Heineke, I brought him up on Sunday's show. Kadero Hodge, 0.1% rostered. He is a big play guy. I loved him on the Browns. It was somebody I was high on, but he's moved all around. He's been quietly not on anybody's team and had any success, but he is a field stretcher and has shown it. Past 2 weeks with Heineke, 10.5 fantasy points. He had 3 receptions for 75 yards. And then this past week, he had 3 receptions for 60 yards. I mean, you're looking at 10 and 9 fantasy points. Like, it's hard to beat that on. It's a Rashid Shaheed kind of a situation with him. And they're going to do that a lot because it's the Falcons, and that's what Heineke likes to do. I mean, he's the one who really boosted Dotson last year. So, And then, you know, as we said for tonight, if he's available, Quentin Johnston, because Palmer's out, and you might as well, if you have the space, you have somebody on by, drop him and pick him up.
Yeah,
like I'm doing definitely. Jerry Jeudy. I'm dropping Jerry Jeudy and picking up Johnston just in case.
Yeah, I agree. You got to pick him up. Tank Dell was another one that I think I saw was like barely over the 50% threshold.
Yep.
And this is a good time to bring up, like, any guys from the teams that are going on by, people dropping that. I looked at the teams last week. I didn't really feel like there was any one that was going to be maybe a drop, but like Tank Dell was a guy that someone had to drop him. Yeah, because it was a big 6 teams on by. They had to drop him. They dropped him Sunday morning. So then when waivers came around, you know, I picked him up and he helped me win this week. So the only one I can think of for the teams coming up is like Rashee Rice. Maybe if he gets dropped, you know, he could be a guy that he's a kind of a fringe starter anyways. And if that team needs to drop him to make space, you know, that's someone to pay attention to. So just always look out for guys like that. But yeah, Tank Dell, Quentin Johnston, if they're out there, they're like number 1 and 2 on the list. Michael Wilson's interesting. You know, he is kind of that downfield player for the Cardinals, and Kyler's coming back, and Kyler's a pretty good deep ball thrower. So there could be a connection here. Who knows? You know, we've seen him flash a couple times this year, and you know, as much as I like Josh Dobbs, he wasn't the greatest at throwing the ball deep. He was very bad, actually. So, and then obviously Clayton Tune was horrendous. So
shocker.
Yeah, really against the Browns, right?
It's hard to look good against the Browns when it's your first time really playing a game. So that's the luck.
But yeah, he's a guy that maybe could pop off for the last few weeks, and Khalil Shakir is another guy. Actually, deeper leagues, 12-team leagues. I started him in one of them, and yeah,
I was talking about him on Sunday. I was like,
Yeah.
hey, they're moving away from the 2 tight end. They're moving to the 3 wide
Yes.
receiver. He's continuing to be on the field. I mean, brought it up again. And sure enough, he beat a lot of people that were starting this week.
Yeah.
So,
yep, they're playing. He's their clear number 3 receiver. Like you said, no more 2 tight end sets, at least until Dawson Knox comes back. And you got 2 more weeks of that. He's out there 65%, 71% the last 2 games, 15.2 points, 9.7 last week. And they obviously, bad offensive game, bad passing game overall. If they could get going, he's probably going to get you 4 or 5 catches, 50, 60 yards, and he always has the opportunity to catch a touchdown. So he's a guy that
PPR. I prefer him over Gabe Davis.
Yeah.
I mean
yeah. So he's going to be out there on a hopefully a good offense. So I forget who the Bills are playing this week. They're playing the Broncos. So that's a pretty good matchup for them. They want a get right game for sure. And then a couple more, Noah Brown. I don't know. It's so hard. He had a huge week in week 9, but I don't know. The thing is though, like it's hard to predict, but he's out there just as much as Nico Collins is. Like he's playing just as many snaps as Nico. And he's running more routes.
He's actually leading the team in snaps last time I looked. Until Robert Woods comes back at least.
Yeah. And so like if they're going to be throwing this much and they just say like, we can't run the ball, we're going to throw it 40 times and they're going to be in these shootouts because maybe their defense isn't very good. You could get games like this from Noah Brown. Again, hard to predict, but again, the guy's out there. It wasn't just like a fluke, like he's only out there in 10 snaps and he happened to catch 3 bombs. No, like he's playing a lot and he's running more routes than guys like Nico Collins and Tank Dell. So
he's looking better. I mean, I'm surprised that they haven't moved on from Robert Woods at this point because he's looking significantly better than him. And while you can't compete with Tank Dell, he's done a decent job at least trying to keep pace with him.
Yeah, definitely. And then Cedric Wilson, they're going on bye, so it's a little harder. But if Waddle's been hurt all year, he's like constant updates. Like he's in the blue tent, in the blue tent. He came into the year healthy, unhealthy, hurt. Could just be one of those years where he just can't get healthy. I know he left. It was a knee injury, I believe, for this game. And I know he was kind of playing in and out. But if he is a little more hurt than we know, Cedric Wilson was the guy that replaced him. So,
well, just like Josh Palmer. He was in and out, and then all of a sudden they threw him on IR. So,
exactly. Re-injured himself. And he'd be theoretically, though he was already playing as like the wide receiver 3, he kind of took over Barrios's role. But if you're talking about the wide receiver 2 on one of the best offenses in the league, like some value there as well in Cedric Wilson. So might be a guy to throw on there and just kind of wait and see what we hear about the Waddle. Again, you might not hear anything this week because they're on a bye.
Yeah. But all right. Well, I'll wrap us up for wide receiver. I think we touched on everybody that I was wanting to make sure we hit on. We'll move in tight end. No surprise. Trey McBride still available. Probably dropped this week because it was the Browns. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was somebody who became available. Was definitely somebody I was fading. But even in this bad matchup, he went 3, 4, 5, caught 22 and had 22 yards. So he put up 5.2 fantasy points. But he still has that ability. Murray's coming back. It was from Tune. So you have to keep that in mind as well. That it's just one game. Like people, that's part of the reason the Dell was potentially dropped. He had 3 bagged games in a row. People weren't going to deal with that in the bye. And so it's one of those things to keep an eye on because I still think with Murray coming back, it's going to be a lot of upside potential for him, and he should see a lot better targets than what he was seeing with Dobbs and even Tune. So,
I like, he needs to be rostered. And Murray might not be running as much as he used to coming off a ACL, at least the first few games, and that means just more targets for guys like McBride and James Conner.
Yeah, and even more. Another name, I guess, that we could kind of touch on, but he didn't do a whole lot this week either. But he saw carries. Which doesn't surprise me with DeMarcado hitting. I think he went on IR officially, but with that in mind, that's somebody else who's going to see carries and short area targets. But speaking of somebody who does it all, Taysom Hill still widely available, making everybody absolutely bonkers. 39.7% rostered. He is doing every position.
It's not going away. I'm telling you, it's not going away.
He's a tight end. He's a quarterback. He's a running back. It really just depends on where they put him up. And when he's in there, he is effective. He threw for a touchdown this past week. He ran a touchdown in. No, he caught a touchdown.
Caught one, yeah.
Yeah.
Ran one last week. Ran two last week. Two, I think, yeah.
Yeah. So the past 3 weeks, for example, 6.8 fantasy points, 22.46 fantasy points, and 20.62 fantasy points over the past 3 weeks. It's bananas. This guy is being used in all facets, even with Johnson back, who saw a lot of usage this week as well. It was really just Hill doing the work. So he's going to be an issue for as long as I can see moving forward. They've finally figured out how to use him, and it's super effective. Not fair. It's a not fair weapon. He's an offensive player for sure. And I am offended.
Yeah. And it really caps like everyone's upside on that team, but he's their goal line guy. He's their red zone guy. Like it's not going, I'm telling you, it's not going away. They're very successful with it. So 11, what do you have? Yeah. 11 carries last week. It was insane. 25 over the last 3 weeks. He's going to be a top 5 tight end. He's already, I think, top 6. Yeah, that's insane. I like both your options more than mine. Kate Otten is an interesting one. He's been playing about 100% of the snaps this year. Last 3 games, 6 and 9 targets. So he's starting to get more targets. Got 2 touchdowns last week. Just kind of monitor it. Like, I think
it was Neil's pick for this past week. He loved Otten.
Mm-hmm.
I was on board. I really like that pick. And just so you know, Taysom Hill currently tight end 11.
Oh, and okay, yeah.
Yes. His first games weren't great, but he's been on a roll the past 3 that have clearly boosted him up.
Yeah. So yeah, Kate Otten's an interesting one, getting used more, so he's going to be out there all the time. Luke Musgrave, we've mentioned a couple times. Don't really want anyone on this Packers team besides Aaron Jones, but if Christian Watson, who's kind of perpetually injured this year as well, if he's out, could be more targets for Musgrave. You know. Could give you 4 for 50 and then the occasional touchdown. So, and then Gerald Everett is another one for the Chargers. I know they're using Parham as well, but still think Everett's the one you want. They're using their tight ends more. Palmer's injured. That could mean even more targets to these tight ends. So good offense. You want to tag yourself.
Those are the 2 that him and Parham. Standard, I'm still going Parham. But in PPR, it's Everett. Everett's more between the 20 guy. And if they're on a roll, they'll keep him in, and he has a potential to score.
Yeah, and we've seen big games from Everett with the Chargers. In the playoff game, we've seen some 70, 80 yard games. So another one I refuse to put down, but I guess we should talk about Jonnu Smith. Like I don't want it, but him. There's 2 tight ends that have had multiple games, I think, of over 95 yards, and one is Kelsey, which makes sense, and the other is Jonnu Smith. It's insane.
The 100-yard game, he got real lucky on that jet sweep.
Yeah,
it took him to it, but man, that was
it's frustrating, but they're using him. Like, what is he? Tight end? Easy a top 10 tight end this year, right?
He is currently 13. I mean, granted, this is through week 8. They haven't calculated this week because we're now close enough to the game that they haven't pulled it up.
Okay, so he'll be in the top 10 after this week, probably, right? So
yeah, he'll likely jump Kyle Pitts, who is right above him currently.
Logan Thomas probably,
and Waller.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't love it.
Maybe even Goddard because Goddard got hurt and missed a good portion of the game. That he's only 17 points away, and he had.
I think Goddard had like 5 for 50 or something.
Yeah.
He had a decent game or 3 or 4, but yeah, I don't know. I hate it as well, but we can't ignore it. I guess like he had 4 or 5 double-digit point weeks now, so that's tough to find for tight ends.
Well, and it helps that London's was out this week, which is why Pitts had so much value. I was super pumped for him, but Smith also had it, and clearly Hodge.
Yep.
So it'll be very interesting to see how it continues with that offense. I like the change to Heineke because he is more of a Wild West guy. He reminds me a lot of Gardner Minshew, for example. He's just kind of the guy who's more willing to sling it around.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Done with tight end. Moving to defenses. Going surprisingly to the defense, current number one defense this week in the Colts.
No. They scored more than the Browns. I guess they had 2 touchdowns, huh?
Yeah, they scored twice, which boosts them up quite a bit.
Yeah.
But they're 10.5% rostered. They get the Patriots, who are still beat up, and they just demolished the Panthers. They put up 27 fantasy points this week. So, granted, I do realize they also had -6 points versus the Saints. That's kind of rough, but versus the Browns, they put up 5 fantasy points. So it's definitely interesting to see how they progress and have quietly put up some pretty decent weeks. And so I think in a matchup versus the Patriots, they could, again, potentially cause some issues for Mac Jones.
Yeah, no, I like that for sure. The team I put first, I feel like we've been mentioning this team every week, like, oh, they're not a great defense. They have a good matchup. The Raiders should be available. I went back and looked. Since week 5, they are the number 1 defense in the NFL. So for fantasy, because it just seems like consistently good matchups, the Giants and the Patriots, and last week was the Giants, but they play the Jets in week 10. So good matchup for defenses, most likely.
We'll see tonight. I mean, Chargers haven't been a great defense, but we'll see how this goes. If it causes some havoc, we Raiders are definitely one that you're probably going to fire up.
Yeah, and then that's it because they get the Dolphins after that. But Dolphins and Chiefs. So yeah, I mean they had Patriots, Bears, Giants. That's Packers.
I feel like we've been mentioning them for, like you said, a couple weeks now. And they've been pulling it off.
They've been good. So it's not like they're good enough. Max Crosby, I guess, is good enough to kind of wreck bad offenses. Buccaneers is another one. They play the Titans in week 10. Will Levis, we'll see. We saw one great game. We saw one game where he kind of looked like a rookie. It wasn't bad, but he looked like a rookie. So he could, struggle. And they're not a terrible defense. They're not the best, obviously, but they're not terrible. And they stop the run well. That's the one thing they do really, really well. And that's the Titans, bread and butter there. So, and then the Lions could have been dropped because they were on a bye. I think they're still a good defense. They don't have the best matchup. It's not terrible. The Chargers, I think they can still give you some points there, but they get, after the Chargers in week 10, they get the Bears, Packers, Saints, Bears, Broncos, Vikings, leading you all the way to the championship week. And then they play Cowboys, but you can basically lock them in unless we see the Bears look really good with Fields back, like they were looking before Fields got hurt. Then maybe it's not so great, but as of now, I think that's, a good defense that gets, 6 good weeks, good matchups in a row. Like you could be, find your, more streaming defenses, for you can close out our show 10 minutes early if you want. Not that you should, but you don't even have to worry about defenses maybe. So yeah, there's some ones out there. All these backup quarterbacks, like I don't know if we're going to have as many this week, but it's making for streaming defenses to be pretty nice. That's for sure.
Nice work, Dr. Squatch. Yep. That was why we talked about it. I mean, it was definitely a good one. Ooh, Aaron Cantu's coming in. Early waivers are Kyler Fields, Carr. Should I drop Carr for Dobbs or just roll with Kyler this week? It's a single quarterback dynasty.
If it's dynasty, I probably still want Carr. I mean, not that you necessarily need it. You got Kyler and Fields in one quarterback. You're probably okay. But, I mean, if you're looking for just to start this week, I'd probably still lean. I'm fine with Carr. I think he's going to give you a safe floor. And, that Jobs does play the Saints. Tough matchup. So, in terms of dynasty, I'd probably just stick with Carr.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, he's going to put up that 13 to 18 fantasy points every week for you. It's not going to kill you, but it's not going to be the boom bust that is Dobbs. So if you're really chasing upside, it's okay, but I also, it comes to dynasty, it really so much changes. The fact that Cousins is likely going to be back next year, like that also hurts him. I mean, I doubt they're going to move on. The Vikings aren't going to move on from Cousins unless it absolutely blows the doors off the rest of the season and takes them to a championship or something, which, I mean, could happen, I guess. Justin Jefferson comes back. We'll see how this team really shapes up, but you usually need some kind of defense, and right now they're not at that point. So,
yeah.
About how much fab do we think Keaton Mitchell's worth? Good question.
Not a whole lot. I mean, I don't know what you have right now. Like,
also, if it's a dynasty league or if it's a redraft, like that's something else to kind of take into account. If it's dynasty, I'll probably spend a little more on him because Dobbins again. Who actually knows? Hopefully he gets dealt.
Yeah. It depends on what you need. Like if you're looking for just that upside play, I wouldn't spend too much. I wouldn't spend more than like 5 to 10% of my original fab.
So it is redraft,
whatever that is. Yeah. Just because it's likely that he doesn't really turn into much, but if you really are desperate for a running back, that's maybe you can spend up a little bit more. We're getting to the point where there's not going to be much on the waivers, like that isn't there. So I wouldn't go crazy.
Yeah. So format. Yeah, unfortunately, Mitchell's not going to be the answer though for you. Unfortunately, and Madison's going to get a boost up. You're more likely trying to get rid of Pierce. That's kind of what's holding you back. But you should be able to ride out Ford and Madison moving forward and be okay.
Yeah. If neither one of those get hurt, you should be pretty good, assuming you're good in other places. So, well, I don't mind, being a little aggressive. If you still have like a lot of fab at this point, go for it. Because again, we're getting to that point where who are you going to spend it on, right? If you're talking about spending the last $10 of your fab on Keaton Mitchell, I probably wouldn't. Just kind of save some for maybe in the playoffs, like a defense to help you win if you're going to make the playoffs, or who knows what comes up next week. Block people. Yeah, exactly. So, but if you still have a bunch, you can spend up a bit.
Yeah, it's probably close to 10 to 50% of whatever you have left is more than enough to get it done. More than likely, people also might just overspend at this point because they saw that one game and expect them to take over, much like, and that's not something the Ravens really, that organization won't do that kind of a thing. I would expect them to see an increased workload, but who actually knows how viable that'll end up being for fantasy. So,
yeah, but at the same time, just look at everyone else we're talking about on this list. Like Deontay Foreman is like a 1 week Band-Aid, or Devin Singletary, I don't even really want, like I guess Keaton Mitchell has that appeal of like, what if he's H-Hand, what if he's 10 to 12 touches and he can take one to the house and a good offense that when they play teams, they're not going to focus on the run. So I'm just, the only thing I'm worried about is like that game was just out of hand for right away. And like, I don't even know. I know they used him in like the second quarter. I think they threw Keaton Mitchell in there. Before that, it was just Justice Hill and Edwards. I wish it was like a closer game and we saw Keaton Mitchell being used and say, they actually want to use him. And it's not just like, and Gus Edwards had like a toe injury during the week. So it's just tough to know if they're just going to throw him back to basically, that was his first carry in the NFL was last week. So it's just tough to know if they're just going to put him back to that kind of player. But again, how do you get away from that, right? Like 9 for 138 stuff.
Yeah, but that in mind, kickoff's about to happen. Make sure you join the Discord. Mike has been doing awesome work. I mean, clearly even helping me because I need it. But with trade stuff, it's getting to that point. We're getting close to the deadline for most leagues coming up, I think, in the next 2 weeks. So that in mind, get help on the Discord. And hey, if you're in a guillotine league tomorrow, we have making the cut. Should log in, check that out. They do a great job. And then we'll be back Thursday for roster of the people. We're going to go bolt up and hope for the best, but we'll see how tonight goes. Enjoy the football game. I'm going to try not to cry because that's what I like to do when I watch the Chargers until the game's over. Pull out my hair and cry. So,
yeah, real quick. My brother he was in Vegas last week. He did a 6 game parlay against the spread, all of them. He's hit 5 out of 6, and his last one is the Chargers, I think -3.5. And I told him, like, why did you bet on the Chargers? They're gonna let you down. He's like, oh, he's thinking about hedging, putting a bunch of money on the Jets and then guaranteeing himself $400. I think he put 20 and it pays out 1,000. So he needs the Chargers to win by 3.5. And I'm just like, man, I don't think they're gonna do it. Like, they're
3.5, man.
Yeah, I don't want the Chargers.
The Chargers happen too much. We've watched it too much. It's too much pain.
I know. So, well, something to watch for sure.
But if you're not watching the game, hope you're enjoying some college basketball, or I guess NBA basketball. Not really my thing, but I guess at that point we'll just remember that you guys had a lot of fun this week, and as always, keep up the nonsense.